You are probably learning about Lewis and Clark's expedition and what they encountered. Well, they encountered one thing. Native Americans, or Indians, as the Americans called them. Let's take a closer look at Native Americans, what they encountered, and how the westward expansion impacted them. But first, let's get to know them. Many tribes lived west of the U.S. or the Louisiana Territory. There were more than 100 tribes in the area, but about 13 main ones. Bison were the main source of food and clothing for Native Americans on the Great Plains. The natives lost a lot of it from Americans eating them too. Native Americans wanted land for hunting and gathering, and they had it. A good one too. In only some cultures, people farmed and only some built permanent homes. They are non-white and non-Christian. Lewis and Clark were friends with one tribe that we know of, the Shoshone. That's where Sacagawea was born and raised. The French Indian trader known as Toussaint Charbonneau. His tribe, the Hidatsa, raided the Shoshone and captured Sacagawea. Since she went along, her husband set her free later or died. He was part of the Lewis and Clark expedition. That is why she went along. He is very nice and had 2 wives. He was married to another girl whose name meant otter one when he married Sacagawea. Then he later considered them as wives. He could have been married to more women, but it's not recorded in a journal for anyone to know. He may have either won Sacagawea or purchased her. Sacagawea's name meant bird woman.
I think Sacagawea is a very important person because she, if it weren't for her, then the Lewis and Clark expedition wouldn't have really happened. Like, everyone would have either died, and our United States would have been way smaller because, I don't think Thomas Jefferson would want to buy the land if no one's done it, and I don't think he was going to send anyone else out if anyone died because he didn't want any Americans dying. And I think her husband, though, was not very good, Toussaint Charbonneau. I don't think he was very good because he just didn't seem like a very nice man. And he kind of, Sacagawea didn't really love him. So I think he isn't that great of a man, and having 2 wives, it may have not been that big of a deal back then. It's a big deal now. And, I think Sacagawea was really hurt. But at the same time, hurt because she lived in the Shoshone and they had to move too to the Oklahoma territory. And I think that she was hurt, but she wasn't, because she actually went on the Lewis and Clark expedition to, invade her land, basically, because she was going through her own land. But I think Sacagawea is good.
So how did it impact Native Americans? Did it impact the Shoshone too, even when they were friends? Yes, it did. It impacted all tribes and Native Americans in the area. Let's get into deeper detail about this. It all started with Lewis and Clark and the very important expedition that would change the world. Thomas Jefferson sent a document that says they own the natives' land now to Lewis and Clark. They read it to all tribes they encountered, even the Shoshone. How could they not be upset and still be friends with them? Well, some were and some weren't. The Shoshone were spread out in large areas too. That's how, on the expedition, Sacagawea met her brother when the Americans needed horses. After that, the Oregon Trail started in 1811. Many Americans began to move west and live in Oregon for better land and not to be so crammed. It was 2,200 miles long. Just a road to Oregon while you ride a wagon. But it was worse for Indians than it was for Americans. 8 years after the Oregon Trail started, James Monroe was elected 5th President of the United States. The United States had turned 50 and Thomas Jefferson and John Adams died. When James Monroe was president, the time was called the Era of Good Feelings. Everyone in the U.S. was happy. There was no war going on. James Monroe did, however, send out a document called the Monroe Doctrine. It warned European nations against interfering in the Western Hemisphere, meaning the Europeans could not establish any more colonies in America. Then James Monroe ended his 2 terms, and John Quincy Adams finished his 1 term, and Andrew Jackson was elected president in 1829. The Trail of Tears and Indian Removal Act was approaching. Andrew Jackson was still president in 1838. That's when it all started. On April 24th, 1830, the Senate passed the Indian Removal Act, the vote being 28 to 19. On May 22nd, 1830, the House of Representatives passed the Indian Removal Act by a vote being of 101 to 97. The Indian Removal Act was signed into law by President Andrew Jackson on May 28, 1830. The Native American nation was forced to give up its lands east of the Mississippi River and to move by foot and wagon to an area in present-day Oklahoma. The Americans called this place Indian Territory. Some tribes, however, resisted and stayed in their land, which was soon going to be a farm or ranch or yard or cotton field. The Cherokee people called this the Trail of Tears because of its grueling side effects on the forced events such as dehydration, hunger, illness, and exhaustion, leading to many deaths. Most observers, whether they were in favor of the Indian Removal Act or not, realized that the passage of the act meant the removal of most Indians from the states. Over 4,000 out of 15,000 of the Cherokees died during the trail. That's just the Cherokee Indians. There was more tragedy. For some tribes, it was easy, but for others, they didn't like the repositioning of land and getting theirs taken away. Later, U.S. Army railroad companies and white settlers wanted to kill all buffalo in the area. They did this because the buffalo hides were valuable. Then, because of this, the natives were starving. They lost their main source of food. They were desperate for anything. Between 1872 and 1875, only 2 years, over 9 million buffalo died. They would usually just take the skin, leaving the rest to rot and have no use. This is really the end of the horrifying events that Indians had to face. They stayed on a territory, though. Some still do today. Some have normal jobs and work in normal places and are normal people.
I'm so sorry.
These events did impact them a lot. If this didn't happen, the U.S. would be smaller. We would have Indians everywhere and Indians would be happy. The Indians could keep their culture going and still have buffalo. It also killed many tribes and family members to these natives. If that didn't happen, they would maybe still have them alive today. This would have never happened, but at the same time, it should have. It wouldn't be a part of history. This is how the United States completely changed. This is how the westward expansion impacted Native